You mentioned Atlanta. It's funny. I was just thinking, like, does being from Atlanta, is that part of your identity? Does that play a role in your label's identity at all? I know that's become kind of a new music hub. The new Nashville is sort of, or like the new LA
Yeah.
over the past couple of years. Same in the film industry. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? Is that part of your identity?
Um, a little bit. So Reach Records originally, we've been around for about 20 years. This was
Wow.
before my time. And it started out in Dallas, Texas. So
Mm.
Dallas is really where Reach originated. And then after that, it was in Memphis for a while. I don't know the exact timeline that it was in Memphis. I do know that it was there for a little bit. And then I want to say that they moved out here right around 2010. And I believe they've been here ever since, or not, I believe, I know that they've been here ever since. And so while Reach Records did not originate in Atlanta, there was a very strategic move on behalf of Lecrae and Ben, who founded the label. Just knowing, at that point, Atlanta was a place for hip hop. Um, and I think they were able to call out pretty early on that it would be a great place to settle down, set those roots, and really establish themselves. Reach as a fairly niche. We release and service a pretty niche audience,
Mm.
and so to be able to place ourselves in a place where hip hop is respected, I think it gives some of that credibility to a hip hop that is Christian hip
Hmm.
hop. And for them to see, like, okay, you guys are here, you're planted. Like I said, it gives a little bit more credibility and validity to what they're doing.
It seems too that it would provide, maybe whether intentionally or unintentionally, a separation from the Christian scene that happens in Nashville too. I mean, that's kind of a very distinct scene, and Reach seems to be a
Yes,
little bit different than that.
exactly.
Yeah. Let's
Exactly. Yes. Um, yeah.
well, we're going to go into that a little bit more, but let me ask you about your identity of being a Christian label or a gospel label. Um, Niches, as you mentioned, like it's great for business. Like from what we've seen, it's actually really good to be able to narrow and to separate so that a certain group of people can say, "I'm really into this," like this, all of these different parameters that make up this sound or this identity. Does it ever limit you though in how what you can do or how you're perceived in the music industry?
Great question. So just to affirm everything that you said, especially now, I mean, definitely as we were building, or when Ben and Lecrae were originally building Reach, um, they were like the ability to build within a very niche community definitely helped them. And then even now, I just think like the way that the industry is going, because it's so saturated, you really and the way that like short form content is working, and the way that social media is even just trending right now, like it really is about uh making sure that your content, your music, everything is meeting, this like these niche communities, and
Hmm.
really focusing in on that, and then allowing them to help break you into the next level. And that's certainly helped get Reach to where it's at. But yeah, to answer your question about limitations, when you are something like Christian hip hop, like I said, started out 20 years ago, and so what we talk about a lot is that Christian hip hop, like it was a weird thing in hip hop, but it was also a weird thing in the church.
Hmm.
Like you said, Nashville culture isn't necessarily something that Reach has necessarily fit into. The church in general, just there was a perception of hip hop, and so they were like, "How can you be a Christian and rap?" Like it didn't make sense. But then on the hip hop side, it was like, there was a certain cultural affiliation that programmers and radio and hip hop culture desired, uh, before they really wanted to give Reach a chance. And so Reach
Mm.
kind of like, and I would say Lecrae and Christian hip hop, it's always, while it's existed in the intersection of faith and hip hop culture, um, it hasn't. been accepted by both.
Oh
And
yeah.
there was a time where it was accepted by neither of those. So really, that's why that niching down was so important when we were building this foundation, this audience. I was a fan at the time, so I remember like it was so specific to me as somebody that, I'm a woman of color at the time. I was an immigrant and I became a Christian, but I didn't feel like I fit this very contemporary image of Christianity that I had seen. And so Lecrae and some of the artists that were coming out of Reach really, uh, they were people that I resonated with. The music, the style, it was something that I felt like I had community with. But going back to your question, especially now, I feel like there's been significant strides on the Christian side and even on the hip hop side. Lecrae's been able to really break into the mainstream of hip hop. But even now, it feels like, we'll have these hits that will like really resonate on social media. We have a song coming in hot that was the number one trending song on Instagram in 2021.
Wow.
And even then, we couldn't get any hip hop programming on that on the radio side. And even DSPs, it's like constantly an uphill battle on the hip hop side. So it's yeah, it definitely presents its limitations, but I think also we are used to it, and it requires a certain level of scrappiness for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Well, and I love it that what we have now today with technology is that you can create your own distribution channels, your own ways to access the audience. And we see this in every micro genre. Whereas, 20 years ago when you guys got started, like you're mentioning 30 years ago, if you're not allowed on Christian radio and you're not allowed on non-Christian radio, regular mainstream radio, then there's nowhere for you. Same with retail. Mm-hmm. And now you can just say, okay, you guys do you. We're going straight to the user.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, and even back then, we've always, during the age of physical, like we definitely always manufactured physical. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was a huge part of our sales. But we've always over-indexed on digital. And it's because the way that Reach started, Ben talks about all the time, like they were really, really big on MySpace, and a big part of the discovery that they had was, like one, they were on the ground going to youth groups, doing a lot of stuff, like trying to break into these different communities in person. But then online, they were always like, that's how they were able to find different audiences that were outside of their territory, and it was through MySpace. And so I think we've always needed to be really leaning into whatever platform of the age is, because that is how you find those communities and really connect with them.
That's so smart. And it's something that a lot of the bigger entities don't do and can't do because they need to hire a young intern. They're just blind to it. And they come on like 10 years too late. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
For an independent to do. Does a Christian label, you mentioned this a little bit, do you have aspirations of mainstream breakthroughs? Is that something that a label like yours would strategize about achieving? Or is it actually more beneficial just to stay niche and to stay committed to your community? I question whether your community want its artists to blow up, or would they want them to be territorial over them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we did achieve a level of that with Lecrae, I would say. And during that time, as he was, they would have been like around, he went number one for his album Anomaly 2014. And then after that, started to do a lot more mainstream features, and there was a little bit of backlash, absolutely. But then you also get the other side where, especially I think in the Christian community, when they see somebody that resonates with their faith win, there is like a level of ownership. So it was kind of a mixed bag with that. I would say that Reach, I like to, it kind of just depends on all the different artist goals. We definitely have artists on the label that are like, we want to stay specifically in the Christian market. And then you have artists that are like, we want to create explicitly Christian music, but they do have hopes of that crossing over. And of course, it does require, again, like really niching down into that and hoping that something resonates, which we do have some instances of that happening right now, which it's been a while since that's happened. So that's really encouraging. And then, you do have other artists that are down to make more lifestyle content that's not necessarily, explicitly Christian, but it's also more positive leaning.
Yeah.
That can live in more mainstream spaces. And we're down to work with those artists too. It's just a reality of like, hey, this is going to be a bit of an uphill battle because programmers do know us as the Christian label. But we have had success breaking Lecrae, as I said, into some other into some mainstream outlets. And so that's helped us retain some relationships and also some trust with different partners, and where we bring them something that is popping off, is culturally relevant, is sonically on par with what the mainstream is playing, they're down to support.
It makes me think about how frustrating it must be, because there's this unwritten rule where if somebody starts off with the Christian label, and I think of like Christian rock from the 90s, but if you start off with the Christian label, then it's really difficult to break out of that into mainstream. But if you start off in mainstream music and then you decide to do a gospel album like Kanye West or like many artists have over the years, you're a hero. You can do both. You can dip your toes over here. It's like, it's such a double standard.
Yes. But also like the counter to that is like, it's much harder to start out in the mainstream nowadays.
Good point.
Then, without, it would be a lot easier to go from mainstream to then like a Christian audience. Because I agree that nowadays it's kind of just like, it's so hard to break out into that world without really like niching down. So we tend to kind of encourage artists like, hey, if you want to make faith-based music, really lean into that first. And then, start to experiment what it looks like to break out into other markets. Yeah,
that's awesome. So I'm judging from the outside, limited knowledge and experience, but I view like traditional CCM or like that Christian music scene as like fairly homogenous, like not leaving a lot of room for genres that don't kind of like fit. So I can think of other indie labels like Tooth and Nail as a great example of Christian labels that have carved out their own space and created their own audience that's like independent of the bigger machine. And so do you feel like that's something that you guys have done over the years?
Yes, you just cut out for a little bit again, but I think I got the
Sorry.
gist of your question.
I think it might be me.
Forgive me if I miss anything.
That's okay.
No, you're fine. Let me know if I'm cutting out too.
Okay.
So, yeah, Tooth and Nail is a great example. Sorry. Your question. Okay, now I'm like,
no, that's okay. Tech is so hard because it really like, I wish we could be in person. Next time I'll fly down. So, or you come up here. It's nice and chilly. So basically, I'm just curious, like when you don't conform to these, like, I mean, we see this in jazz too. I mean, some people have to conform to whatever New York City jazz dictates as the rules. And when they don't, they're these kind of weird independent labels, but that's what we love as music fans. And so do you feel like you've done that? You've created this niche outside of that homogenous CCM scene?
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like, how I was saying earlier, we always say that Reach exists in this intersection of faith and hip hop. And because of that, while Christianity has, a lot of what I would say, like the Christian music gatekeepers, over the last decade really let Lecrae in. If you look at Christian, like contemporary Christian music, and if you just look at even just the radio format, to your point, it is a very, very specific sound that they play. And we've never fit that sound. We've never fit, the contemporary Christian sound. And And it's something that I hope with time that'll start to change a little bit, because you need a genre to evolve, um, and grow so that you can reach, a younger demographic. That being said, it's why we've always done so well in digital. We've
Yeah.
we've had Lecrae, Andy Mineo. They've had gold and platinum records with zero radio support, and it's because they've been able to reach this audience that's really resonated with them.
Mm.
We have there's Reach Records, and then there's also like the 116 brand, which is, stands for Romans 116, based off of that verse. And then with that, like, it's the verse starts out, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel." So unashamed is a this banner that the 116 community has really carried. And what's really beautiful about that is not only did Lecrae at the very beginning build this audience, but it was so niche, and it was a movement that people started to get behind, that the brand became so strong that anytime an artist would be signed to Reach, they had an immediate audience
Mm.
attached to them.
Yeah.
And so really, we call it the reach effect. I mean, anytime that we sign an artist, they're following almost quadruples, and it's not because of this crazy press campaign. It's not because of out of home. It's not because of anything other than Reach on their platform announces a new artist. And it's
Mm.
because Reach has developed such a core cult following that they're just like, they know whatever artist we sign, they know exactly what they're getting, and they know that it's going to resonate with the mission of Reach. So to answer your question, yes, we've been able to create that outside of the traditional Christian audience.
So that A&R process must be very intense, because you're giving someone basically a golden ticket, and they have to like respect the kind of the ethos that you've created over 20 years.
Yes. And what's really, and I mean, our shout out to our A&R team. Ace Harris is our head and A&R here at Reach, and I don't take anything that he does lightly.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, all of our artists, there's always just this really natural relational process that takes place before we sign them. Um, and what's really dope is actually, probably since about 2018, all of the artists that we've signed actually grew up listening to Lecrae and Tripoli and Andy
Mm.
Mineo's music. And so now we have this entirely new generation of artists that actually grew up being a fan of like this 116 movement and what Lecrae had built
Wow.
alongside, some of the inaugural Reach artists. And so it is the A&R process. It's a very careful process, but also you come to Reach because you know what Reach is about too.
Sure.
And so I think, like, if you're within the Christian hip hop community, hopefully, you know about Reach, and typically it happens a little bit more. The connections tend to happen a little bit more naturally that way.
So tell me about what advice would you give for somebody who wanted to start a brand new Christian label? I mean, I'll get maybe every once in 2 months or every couple of months, somebody will email me and say that that's the genre that they're pursuing for their new indie label. I feel like I'm kind of two minds, because I'm like, half of me is like, great, I don't hear that very often. You're going to beat out all of the other little indie rock labels who aren't so defined. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do outside of the Nashville machine. I'm scared for you. So what advice is there room for people to start a Reach Records like you guys did 20 years ago?
That's a great question. I'd be curious to hear, like, what direction they're going sonically.
Sure.
I do believe that there's room for more Christian labels that are independent to really thrive, but I think it's going to require innovation and an understanding of what the younger consumers really want. I think that's what has set Reach apart. Is, there's always an intentionality, like even from Lecrae, like he is continuously like developing our younger talent. He's aware of the younger artists that are out there. Like he has really positioned himself as an executive that's committed to continuing the growth of the genre and creating infrastructure. And I think to start a Christian label that's independent in this day and age, you have to think about like, what's the infrastructure? Am I willing to help build the infrastructure for it, especially if it's a like even more niche within Christian, and then defining what that sound is, what you want those artists to be, and yeah, just making sure that it's. I think we have a ton of traditional contemporary Christian artists, and they're doing great things. And this isn't,
Sure.
to diminish any of that hard work. But when you see what's happening on social media, you see the sounds that are trending. You notice like these Gen Z, and we have to start thinking about Gen Alpha now, like their consumption habits.
Yeah.
Are we giving platform and space for these artists that are Christians, but want to create in a way that's going to reach that younger market? And I think anybody that's willing to figure out what that looks like and kind of get in the trenches and do that work, 100%, not only is there space for that, but I think the genre really needs it in order to survive in the next,
You're
several
totally
decades.
right. You're totally right. And I think that's true for lots of genres. I think lots of genres, jazz is an example I already used, but they need innovation as well. And they're getting it. And gospel, I got to give a shout out to one of my favorite labels I discovered recently is Gospel Hydration out of the UK, who they've done stuff, with Afro beats and gospel music. And they're even doing lo-fi chill and instrumental music that is gospel music, which is, bizarre to think about, but it has a place because it doesn't exist. And I love that, to see innovation and evolution in gospel and in any genre. Do you guys feel, you're talking about reaching younger generations, do you feel a responsibility to evolve the sound, to progress the sound? Like, will we hear curse words in gospel music soon? Like, where does it go from here? You know what I mean?
Not that way. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, the and I know that I said this earlier, but like the gatekeepers of traditional, I mean, when you look at like DSPs, like I think on the DSP side, most of the programmers are like, they're kind of on the same page. They're like wanting to evolve. When you look at more traditional formats, and I would even say most programmers across the board, they want to evolve, but I think it's just also getting the stakeholders to buy in as well, and a more traditional audience to buy in. But I mean, that's what we're focused on reach. You mentioned gospel hydration. We were actually just in the UK. One of our recent signing on, I assume this is included. Not this week, but on Friday. So I can announce this because by the time that this podcast goes live, this will be up. But I just got an email from our rep at Amazon Music, and she just let us know that they're finally launching their Afro Gospel playlist this Friday, and they're going to feature their face out is going to be with our artist Limo Blaze. And this is a conversation that we've been having for a year since Limo's music started to take off, and some of the stuff that Gospel Hydration was doing. I've been talking to our Amazon rep for a while about what it would look like to start to develop programming around this new sound. And it's really dope that they're launching it. Spotify just launched their first one a year ago. So there's innovation happening in the same way that 20 years ago, people in the church were like, what is Christian hip hop? Now you have people Limo Blaze tells me all the time that there's churches in Nigeria that don't understand what he's doing. They're like, Afrobeat isn't traditional African gospel. Like, we can't let this in the church. And they're hearing him and other artists in his lane start to do that. And now they're welcoming that sound in. And it's going insane on the internet. This song that he has releasing on Friday called Over, it already has over 2,500 creates on social media. And it's because there's an audience that's hungry for this more progressive sound of Christian music, where the content is it's positive and it resonates with their convictions, but it's also quality and is appealing to the youth. So to answer your question, that is a really big focus for us, and I think there's others that are kind of thinking in the same way in the Christian space.
That's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that the DSPs are. And it's one of the things I've loved about the trend of playlists is for them to introduce a new style of music and to break out of that. I mean, in your space, there was worship, and then there was contemporary Christian music, and so to hear that there's these new subgenres is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about our community of record labels is quite insulated, and we know why we exist and what we bring to the artist relationship. And I want to talk a little bit about the artist label relationship and the value of advocating for artists and basically what we do in our jobs. But as you know, it's trendy to poop on labels, and a lot of people say labels don't have a place anymore. And we've talked about gatekeepers, and a lot of people see labels as gatekeepers. In your opinion, why does the record label still play a vital role? Why are record labels like yours one of the good guys?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's definitely a conversation that I try to approach with just always trying to learn and understand the other perspective. And I think my answer to that is, and I say this kindly, but I think not every artist is built the same. I have my gifts,
Yeah.
and I know what my weaknesses are. And I think not every artist is Russ. And I think that there's a lot of artists that are like Russ and have that mentality and are able to, create music, create merch, run all of these, basically build this empire on their own. And I'm like, I support that 100%. But I also think that there's maybe artists that, that doesn't come as naturally to them, or they're still learning, or maybe they just don't want to do all of that and they want to rely on a team. And I think it's still rare that anybody still makes it to that level completely on their own. And even some of these independent artists that are making it on their own would also say you need to build a team.
Yeah.
And so that's where, I think a label, if you can negotiate a great deal, and set level expectations, and I think that that's where there's benefit for labels. And I also think, there's definitely art to be made for an artist that has been doing it on their own, and they have a certain level of success, and they have they can leverage that on their own. But if you have a label, like for example, for the most part, I think our sauce really is in artist development. It's something that we've really thought about a lot. When in the last few years, when you were seeing all of these major labels really pick up some of these TikTok stars, we started to kind of look into what that looked like. And the reality was, like, we could just kept coming back to, we're great at artist development. And I look at some of our artists that we've signed, and they started out with barely any releases and very, very small followings. And it took time, but, with consistency and releases, and also, and I really want to say this because I think sometimes we talk a lot about the marketing side of what a label does, and I'm on the marketing side. So we talk about, like, there's a lot that you can do on the marketing side on your own. And I agree with that, even as the head of marketing at our label. That being said, I think that argument really misses there's a general undervaluing and an underappreciation for what an A&R team can do for an artist. And that's something where, again, shouting at our A&R team, because the way that they can really help a label that is willing to be in the trenches with you, build, have transparency, have honesty, have relationship, to where you can trust them on the music development side. And then, of course, on the marketing side, like, they need to be like I feel challenged by this all the time, especially nowadays when artists are, we do need our artists to give a little bit more by being willing
Hmm.
to create social content and things like this. I'm always challenging my team to make sure that we're bringing value, whether it's, bringing in new creative directors, bringing in, handling the logistics of different shoots. And then, of course, on the DSP side, there's so many different things that I still think, even with tools like Spotify for artists, there are so many other DSPs and different opportunities that artists can get that they on their own aren't able to. And so when you have a label, when you have somebody that's dedicated to those commercial partnerships, there's a lot of value that can be found there. But of course, you need to keep your label in check and make sure that there is that value exchange that's happening. That was a very long answer to your
No, good,
question.
good. It's helpful. It's great. I hope people listen to it on halftime speed so they don't miss anything. So I do. It's funny you talked about marketing because my next question is about this idea about how do you divide your attention marketing the brand of Reach versus marketing the artist and the artist's own brand. And you talked about this incredible platform that you've created to the point where when a new artist comes on, they're instantly famous in your community. So how do you invest in these artists, build up their brand, market their new release and their new single, at the same time marketing Reach and making sure that Reach is a brand that people know, whether or not they know any of the individual artists or all of the artists, but they know the brand. So how
Yeah,
do you balance that? Is one more important than the other?
that's a great question because it's something that we actually just met about it today.
Oh, cool.
Because we've had so many great moments with our artists. Just like we continue to we're all of our artists continue to release and just immediately start trending on Instagram, which is wonderful. But also, it just means like we're always go go go
Yeah.
responding to that. And so I would say, like honestly, top priority right now are our artists,
Mm.
and making sure like right now we have releases every week, we have catalog that's popping off, so I try to have my team make sure that they're focused on that. And it's funny, we have our 20-year anniversary of Reach Records, that
Oh,
just
wow.
happened last month, and we're going to be celebrating it for the next month, for the next year.
Yeah.
And just today, I was like able to sit down with a couple of people from the team and be able to figure out like what does it look like to honor the last 20 years and to leverage this moment to create a moment to thank the fans and
Yeah.
to thank the artists and just create something that's really special. And it's hard when you do have all of these moments with the artists. And again, you want to provide value to the artists and you want the artists to know that, they like we know how we know how label profitability works. We know
Yeah.
the financials of it. And so we want our artists to know that they're a priority. But with that, we have to kind of like be able to set aside some time. It's just time management. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, I don't really have a direct answer
No,
for
that's
that
right.
other
Yeah.
than we prioritize the artists, and then when we have time to celebrate and to create these like special Reach moments, we try to create those. But never mad. We're never upset that we have unlimited amount of artists
Yeah. Yeah.
releases to
That's
promote.
that's awesome. No, that's a good answer. So the idea of Lecrae being an artist on the label and starting the label, and very similar to a lot of stories by independent
Yeah.
artists, where an artist is like, "I'm going to do this on my own." What's the importance now of being an artist-led label, or a label founded by an artist? How does that change things in how you operate and how you treat artists?
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't know, Reach is all that I've known in the industry.
Hmm. Hmm.
So but I don't have anything really else to compare it to, but I am always so grateful to have the artist perspective um at the table.
Mm.
So, every Monday we meet as an executive team. Lecrae is always a part of that. And, you know, it's important, like he's our artist too. So if we market, his release, he's gonna let us know immediately what he thought the wins were, what he thought, we could
Yeah.
improve on
Yeah.
is. And so having that direct feedback is always helpful. And then just having that artist perspective. I think it just helps us empathize with the different artists better. He also just has a great, I mean, I can't speak to his individual relationships with the artist, but from my perspective, I know that he really tries to spend a lot of intentional time with the different artists. And so
Oh, cool.
I think that also helps create a level of trust as well when he is speaking with some of the artists for him to like, if there's ever like a question of motives or a question of um, effort.
Yeah.
Lecrae can always speak from his perspective as the label as well, and kind of speak to um, what we're doing. And so I think I just think it's an incredible advantage. And again, that empathy goes a really, really long way to establishing trust between the artist and the label.
It just made me think, you talked about wins and how things went. Do you have debrief times with the artists after a campaign? Do you ever ask, or maybe even before, do you ask them what their expectations are for a campaign or try to temper their expectations? How do you know if they're happy after an album is out, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we'll always hear if they're not happy. So I think that's probably common with every label.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I think ahead of time, we try to set objectives
Mm-hmm,
around
mm-hmm.
a release and a campaign. So typically, we try to use data and just like as a label, propose some different objectives, make sure that the artists align, have them speak into it. We try to address those. And then that kind of keeps us in line throughout the release process. And then after we send out a recap that shows, these are different campaigns that we launched, here are different looks that we got. And typically we'll send that out to artist teams. I think right now we're trying to come up with a much more formal way to debrief those moments. But I will say, I think because of, I don't know if I said this earlier, but the way that Reach started, Ben and Lecrae met in college, and they were doing basically these like street ministry and then Lecrae started to rap. And they were going to these youth groups and rapping. It was like really organic. And then Lecrae's roommate got involved, who his name was Tadashi, and would later be an inaugural Reach artist. And then they got another kid from the community named Tripley. So really the initiation of Reach was a community of guys doing ministry together that never thought that they would end up doing this full time. And so that's created a culture within Reach where like there is just this community within the artists, and even has translated and bled into the culture of the staff. Like most of our staff have some sort of relationship with all of the artists. They really trust our A&R team for the most part. And I think we always get feedback that way, even if it's not super formal. It's really helpful to just like know, even when I'm just like, if I'm checking in with an artist about something that's not specifically release related, but just about something else, I always try to check in and see, like,
Good,
is there
yeah.
anything that we can be improving on, or anything that you're looking for that you haven't seen? I think just like creating those intentional moments for feedback, because life is always moving so fast. I just think it's important, and it helps artists, I think, feel heard as well.
Is there a way for the label mates, the artists on the label, to interact with each other and to kind of foster that community? I imagine they're from all over the country and the world. Is that something on your mind?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's something that I know Lecrae and our team, and even our engineer, like, and Ben, our CEO, they all try to really create that. One of the things that Reach did at the very beginning, and something that we've always been known for, they started something called the Unashamed Tour at the very beginning of the right as Reach was starting to grow, where basically it was just all of the artists on the label were touring the country. And in 2022, last year, was our sixth Unashamed tour. And again, it was all 8 artists on a label, basically touring the entire city together. And so that's another thing that like
That's
we
awesome.
really love it because obviously it continues to cultivate the brand and creates that audience connection. And it's obviously great for the music and the artists, but also the reason that we love it as well is because it does foster that community within the artists as well. They're on the road together.
Yeah,
It's something
yeah.
that we are really it's an opportunity for them to kind of create that as well.
Um, what do you, as the music industry is changing all the time, like what are you excited about right now? What channels or ways of connecting with fans is working really well for you? From a marketing standpoint or distribution, or is there formats that you're interested in? Like, are you positive right now about the outlook of the music industry as a whole? Not necessarily just reach or just gospel music, but
Yeah.
that too.
Um, yeah, I think the over the last few years, the rise of short form content has, I think, in general, been a positive thing. Sorry, my camera got a little blurry there for a
Sorry.
second. I think in general, it has been a more positive thing because it, especially for more up and coming talent, niche artists, having that distribution channel via TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts.
Yeah.
It's been a really positive thing for us. So I think
Great.
that's exciting for me, even though it's been a while now. I still feel like it's really benefiting our artists, and even just like finding creative ways to uh, dive into that. Um, so that's been a really positive thing. Other things that I'm excited about, I think I mentioned this earlier, but um, I it's funny because I we've talked about niches a lot throughout this entire podcast, but I've been uh, really just studying the market and seeing what some people are saying. And I think right now, more than ever, these niche communities are the best way for artists to really build up their fan bases.
Wow.
And I think there's just more opportunities now than ever. And if you look at the different things that social platforms are even doing, like Instagram Lunch broadcasts, and then I heard recently, I'm not 100% sure if they've like announced this, but I've heard that there's going to be like, in the way that you can do close friends on Instagram, you're going to be
Yeah.
able to do close friends feeds. Um,
Oh, okay.
and so that to me is even more
Mm.
confirmation that these like micro communities, it's going to be less about like broadcasting to a million people and more about like really broadcasting to these people that like a smaller amount of people that are really engaged and are really tapped in and want to help you grow. And that's really exciting for me to figure that out with each artist. You were speaking about, how do we
Yeah.
take time to develop their individual brands? And as much as, I am proud that Reach has cultivated this brand and this movement, I also recognize that every artist has their own identity. They want to create their own platform. And with these resources that are coming up in the market and the way that social media is kind of trending, it just gets me really excited to be able to build these micro communities around them.
That's so smart. And when you talk about that, I start to think of the different micro communities I find myself in. I was like everyone 5-10 years ago, I was happy to get rid of Facebook because I didn't really care to hear my political opinions of friends and family members and crazy grandmas. But then those affinity groups started popping up, and you could join a private group for a very specific interest of things you collect, and then things in your, a private group for people in your neighborhood, and then at your kid's school, and so on and so on. And now I find that like I can't get rid of Facebook because of these affinity communities. It proves your point that they are intensifying.
Yeah, even WhatsApp, I think they just rolled out like a broadcast option on WhatsApp too, which is just even just like for an artist that's trying to even, I mean, we have some artists that like we want to do some stuff internationally with, and there's just like new opportunities for that to build community. Like you get to DM and like hear specific these like special exclusive things from an artist. I just I get really excited about that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this, your time to chat. I mean, I love your label. I love what you guys have done. I love how you existed. You exist as an independent. You're still independent, right? You guys are independent.
We are
Okay.
100%
Okay. Good.
independent. We distribute independent. We distribute completely in-house too. It's something that we're really proud of. So
Wow, that's
yes,
awesome.
yes. Yeah,
I
it's great.
I remember Atlanta. Well, no, it was Nashville. I think it was Nashville became Nashville because of like it being central, like all the highways. So for like
Yeah.
Elvis and or Johnny Cash, they would just go out from there. And Atlanta's the same kind of way, right? Like it's super central.
We're working towards it. We're definitely working towards creating more infrastructure. And I think Music Biz is supposed to be based out here next year. And you hear
Oh,
a lot of
cool.
these different like
Yeah.
conferences they want to
Yeah.
be out here. So
Yeah.
we're on our way.
That's awesome. I
It's a
was
good place
there
to be.
in 2010, and I'm from Canada, and I was there in 2010, and they had like a huge ice storm. Well, it wasn't a huge ice storm. It was like a quarter of an inch of snow on the ground, and it was like an apocalypse that happened. Like cars were in the ditch everywhere, and I remember they poured gravel all over the streets and
Yeah.
everything. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I love
What year did
Atlanta.
you say that was?
2010 maybe? 2011.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. These
20.
ice storms. I moved here in 2017, but I've heard about some of these.
Okay.
They're like historic. Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah, yeah.
terrible. Crazy time to be here.
But I love Atlanta. It's a great place. Thank you so much for doing this. Such an honor to chat with you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.